Okay. This first question. Do your parents support what you do now? No, they don't. Because they're both dead. They passed away. But when they were alive, they did not object to me becoming a monk. And in fact, this was very moving for me because nobody in either side of my family had ever been to university. And both parents from poor backgrounds, my father in particular, like 10 brothers and sisters living in a very small little house, like two-bedroom house. And my father was a self-taught man. He was always very curious about things and liked to find out and find new knowledge for himself. But he had to leave school when he was 11 to go to work to help the family. So he had very little formal schooling. And I was always very good at school. And I was top of my class in most subjects, and I was put up a year, so I was studying a year ahead of my age and still was a very successful student. So it was my father's dream that I would go to Oxford or Cambridge, become a professor or something like that. Also, he was very, could say, anti-religious, because growing up in great poverty during what they called the Great Depression in England, and he told me he went to churches to listen to see if religious people had any like wise reflections or things that could help you in your life, and he said he found nothing at all that inspired him or helped him in any way. So he was always very sort of anti-Christian, anti-religion, not sort of outspokenly, but just privately. So eventually I had to tell him that I'm not going to university, although I could have done. I could have gone to Oxford or Cambridge, in fact, if I'd wanted to. But I didn't. And I wanted to go to Thailand to become Buddhist monk. So it's like two or three blows all at once. Like his greatest dream for me was for me to go to university. So I said, I'm not going to university. He has no interest at all in religion or what he understands to be religion from Christianity, and I want to become a monk. And I want to go to be a monk in Thailand, thousands of miles away, and I don't know when I'll be back again. And so you can imagine the impact of that. And he stood there and he thought about it, and he said, well, I don't know anything about Buddhism, but if you're really sure this will make you happy, then it's okay by me, because that's the most important thing. So I think, parents will often say this when they, oh yeah, all we want you to do is be happy, but they often have quite a kind of an agenda and expectations for children, and can be quite pushy about them sometimes. So I felt that's just the most profound connection I ever had with my father, was at that moment when I could really measure just how true his love for me was, and measured by how much he was willing to give up of his own hopes and desires and expectations simply because he trusted that I knew what I was doing and that if I felt this was going to make me happy in my life, then he would support it. My mother's, for her, it was more a matter of living a long way away, because remember, in those days, in the 1970s, we didn't have, telephones, mobile phones, didn't have FaceTime and Zoom and all these things. So going abroad is a real separation. And I used to write these, in those days, I don't think you still get these really very thin paper aerograms, they're called, like really thin and light. And when they, at Wat Nanachat, other monasteries, not so sure, Wat Nanachat people used to offer these aerograms, and you could write very small and just write home. And then at Wat Nanachat, we instituted this custom on Christmas Day. We'd rent a songtao, and all the monks and novices would go into the post office in the town and use the public telephones to make calls home to say Happy Christmas to our families. That was, the extent of the connection in those days. So that was very difficult for my mother, being so far away. But in later years, I started to go to visit more often, and then they would come out to Thailand, and they loved it in Thailand, and they made so many good friends, and they would go to the monastery, and on one prat, at night, in the evening time, after evening chanting, I'd usually give Dhamma talk to the village people, and it's usually an hour or 2 hours. And my father and mother would always sit there and listen to the whole time. They didn't understand a word. And I said to my father, I said, you don't have to sit there, till late at night. You don't understand what I'm talking about. And he said, no, I like the atmosphere. I just like to sit there and listen to you talking to all the village people. So I think my father, if my father had been exposed to Buddhism at the same age as me, I think he might have followed a similar path. And he had a real inquiring mind. And I often said in his later years that of all the religions in the world, Buddhism was the only one that made any sense to him. So a lot of parents, Western monks, particularly in the old days, could be if they're very born again Christians or something like that, or that would be a really big issue. And when I first entered the monastery, one of the monks, Western monks in Wat Pah Pong, received a telegram. So we don't have those anymore. A telegram to say his father had a heart attack. So everybody ran around and managed to produce a plane ticket for him to go home. And when he got home, it was a lie. He hadn't had a heart attack. It was just a way to get the son to come back to England, get him to disrobe. But he didn't disrobe immediately. He went to stay with Ajahn Sumedho, but that's another story. Okay, are ghosts real? Have you ever seen a ghost? So let's start off with the evidence find in the Patraipitok or in the suttas and the discourses of the Buddha. And it's very clear from its primary sources, from the evidence of people who have developed their mind to incredibly profound levels of peace and insight, that there are, you call it amanut. So we're manut and there's amanut. So these are beings of other realms apart from human beings. And these are referred to just in a very normal everyday manner. It's like, it's not like a matter of doctrine that you have to try and persuade people that these beings exist. But the ability to see or hear beings of other realms, is very unusual. Some people have it as just born with it, probably from past lives. Some people develop it through meditation. There's an interesting discourse where the Buddha is talking about his own meditation practice before he became enlightened and how his samadhi became deeper and deeper. And he said at the beginning, be sitting in the forest, he couldn't see anything. And then after a while in practice meditation, he started to see these little lights like whip, 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 whip. And then as his meditation continued, he began to see figures. And then he began to see their expressions and their clothing. And then another stage, he knew they were devas. So they were tivada of this level and that level. And then the final level of his insight was to know all those were devas who were born in this realm because of making this karma. So here it's presented as your ability to see these things is determined by the quality of your awareness. So people are talking about ghosts, but these amanut is not restricted to ghosts, and devas are amanut also. As far as ghosts are concerned, there's always been in Buddhist Theravada Buddhist countries, there's always been a little bit of a conflict with regard to ghosts, because the Abhidhamma is a very kind of refined Buddhist psychology. And in the Abhidhamma, it denies the existence of ghosts, which is a real problem for anybody who lives in a Buddhist country, because, the formally animists, and also there is so much experience in these realms, which contradicts the Abhidhamma teachings. Anyway, that's another point. My personal belief is that there are ghosts. Okay, so I'll answer the question straightforwardly. But I would say that the vast majority, 90-something% of the vision, sight of ghosts, hearing ghosts, is upadana, is like coming from people's imagination, perceptions and imagination. Nevertheless, there are occasions, there are sights of ghosts, and which can't be explained in that way. What's more important than arguing whether they're really ghosts or it's just upatan or whatever, is what is the correct attitude towards ghosts. There's certainly what I've never heard of is of ghosts physically attacking human beings or hurting human beings in any way. That's just in movies and stories. But if there are pretas, these what we call hungry ghosts, then they may appear on certain occasions, asking for us to make merit and share merit with them. So that would be the worst case. It's like preta appearing and wanting you to make merit for them. But to be a danger to somebody, no, then there's not a danger. And so I haven't ever seen a ghost. And I'm living in forests in Bacha, for 40, 50 years. I know people who have seen ghosts, and their accounts, of all the people who've seen ghosts, there are certain people who recount seeing ghosts, and their accounts are plausible, sound true, and so but it's hearsay. It's not direct experience. But this world is far more mysterious. There's far more going on, than the normal kind of coarse consciousness is aware of. Okay, so this is a Thai question. I'll either leave this for later on or for this afternoon. Just doing this. So how do you determine who is good, as in who to keep in contact with? If our method of labeling someone is flawed, how can we improve upon it? Is it wrong to think this way? Well, we chanted the Mangala Sutta yesterday, and that begins, the first verse is, don't consort with fools, make friendships with wise people. So, of course, the first observation there is we can't always choose the people we spend time with. And you can have, maybe, in your family, foolish people in your family, and, you can't refuse to have anything to do with them. But it's, the question here is, if you're hanging out with people, you absorb things from them, they absorb things from you. And, it's like what kind of things you talk about, and whether or not you talk about other people behind their backs, or whether you speak coarsely or not, or what kind of jokes you tell, and how you spend your time. So all these kinds of things affect you over time very, very deeply, particularly in terms of what just comes normal and naturally to you. The way of behaving, the way of speaking, and so on. So if you have people who have a low moral standard, and here I think 5 precepts is a kind of gold standard for conduct. I know it's probably controversial because so few people do keep 5 precepts, but I would say somebody who doesn't keep the 5 precepts is not completely trustworthy. I would think the fact that failure to keep 5 precepts to me is a sign that someone is lacking a certain intelligence and certain integrity and trustworthiness. So 5 precepts is a good standard, like a base standard. But the other, yes, so the question is, if our perceptions are flawed, Well, yes, they are, and so we always take them with a pinch of salt. But we also listen to other people. So we have a friend, and we have certain perception of that friend, and then everyone else will have a perception of that friend as well, and seeing whether they line up. There might be sort of different views of this person, but if, for example, there's a kind of pattern where most people will make this observation, and then we're on the other camp, we're the only person who thinks this way, then could mean that we just have more insight into them, but very often it means that we have a blind spot. So being open to feedback from others. And of course the test is, when you go through different experiences together. So, you call fair weather friends. So friends who, when everything's going well and you're on top, and then they want to spend time with you, but then when your life's difficult, you're having some problems, they disappear. So that's a sign of not a very good friend. Or if somebody makes another kind of criteria I've observed, if somebody makes some kind of false accusation against you, how easily does that friend of yours believe that? Do they immediately jump on the bandwagon or not? The true friend will, give you the benefit of the doubt, say innocent until proved guilty. But a false friend will just jump on the wagon and say, it's probably true. So you're observing all the time, and you want good quality friends, and the best way to find good quality friends is to yourself to try to be a good quality friend, because it's the English idiom. Birds of a feather flock together. People of similar type attract each other. So it's good to be careful with your friends, because if you're at all, you have that kind of grengjai personality where you tend to just follow other people too easily, then you don't want to be getting into that position in the first place. Can you talk more about rebirth? Are you consciously aware when reborn, or is it more an energy? And do you believe you had a past life? So for me, I just thought it was like an obvious from a child. First time I heard about it, that makes sense. And what's the alternative? What's your alternative hypothesis? You're created from nothing, or God creates a soul and puts it in a body. Every alternative hypothesis to rebirth never made any sense to me. So speaking personally here, rebirth just kind of seemed like no-brainer. It's kind of obvious. Child prodigies, 2 and 3 years old. How do you explain that? Or, as they say, children all over the world, 2, 3, 4 years old, who can talk about past lives in incredible detail, about places that they could not possibly have gained the information or memorized that information. So it makes sense, I think, on the logical point of view. And as I say, if you reject teaching of rebirth, then you should be able to come up with an alternative hypothesis. Where does this life come from? So there are people who've developed meditation, Buddhist practices, and sort of inner, particularly in Tibet, it's a kind of inner science to the level that they can choose their rebirth. So, we have like the Dalai Lama and so on, where monks will, before they pass away, will give some information. In fact, I have a lay supporter in Tibet, and this happened in his family. There was a great monk. It's a long story, I'll just cut it short. But before he passed away, he told his lay supporter that he would be reborn in his family and that he would be reborn with the sun and the moon. So it sounds like really poetic, be reborn with the sun and the moon. And then he passed away, and then some years later, a boy was born in this family, and he has a birthmark on his forehead, and there's a circle like the sun, and then underneath is a crescent, like crescent moon. I have this photo of this on my telephone. I was really interested. And so everyone was very excited, and 3 or 4 years old, he went to a monastery and became a novice monk, and sort of in Tibetan style. Another interesting phenomena in Thailand, I don't know if you've heard about this, where people make an adhitan for someone to come back in the family, and they make a mark on the body of the deceased person. And then when the child is born, they will have a birthmark which corresponds to the mark made with a pen or whatever on the body of the person when they pass away. So that's also kind of fascinating thing. So it's not, apart from these very special individuals who can determine their rebirth, there are some stream enterers in Theravada Buddhism who are said to be able to do this also, but it's really the minority. And see, there's just this ongoing process in which the rebirth is conditioned or determined by the kusala, akusala dhammas, the good and bad qualities in the heart, the coarseness or the refined nature of this mental stream. So yesterday I also, when we're talking about abortion, I mentioned that our understanding is that for conception to take place, there has to be a gandhabba, like a vinyana or a being to be born. So it's not just a purely physical union of egg and sperm, as you read in a biology textbook, but this third factor, which you can't detect with modern technology, is called gandhabba, and that's the rebirth consciousness. And that's the understanding. Okay. So I'll tell you a past life story. So last night I was telling you when I was in India as a teenager and wandering around northern Himachal Pradesh in the Himalayas, looking for places to meditate. And I traveled on this principle of not deciding where I'd go. I'd get on a bus, take out how many coins, I'd put them down, and however far they would take me, I would get off at that point. So I did this one day, and I got off And it's way up in the north near the Chinese border. And there's a huge river that flows out. It's one of the great rivers of India called Sutlej River. And it flows through a gorge with very steep cliffs on either side. And so there, I was near a village on the top of this cliff. And I got off this local bus and somebody said, where are you going? I said, I'm looking for a place to meditate. He said, oh, well, there's a cave where the monks and sadhus and people stay. I'll take you there. So he took me, and it's a kind of holy cave with a like a stone dais, a bit like this, where I could sleep. And so I stayed there for some days, and then this is another story why I left. No, I'll leave that for now. But I left after some days, and 20-something years later, I was speaking with a woman in Ganchanaburi who has all these kinds of special abilities. And she said, Ajahn, before you became a monk, did you ever go and meditate in a cave? And it would have been a cave where you could see through a crack in the rock and look down a cliff, and there was a big river flowing very fast down below. And I said, yes, how on earth could you know that? You know, it's weird. And she said, do you know why you went to stay in that cave? And I said, it was completely random. I was trying to live my life according to random principles. This was a kind of a thing I had at this time. And she said, no, the reason why you went to stay in the cave is that many lifetimes ago, you were a rishi, and you lived in that cave and you died in that cave, and your bones are under the floor of that cave. And that's what drew you to that cave. So that's my past life story. Yeah. Okay. What are your thoughts on the movie Satu? So I don't. Can somebody tell me the plot? What's it about? Have people watched this? Okay, I haven't seen it, so I don't have any thoughts on it. I don't know if anybody's told you yet, but there's a kind of special session tonight for volunteers after 9 o'clock. So I'm writing a screenplay for a TV series, and the first episode is more or less complete. And if anybody's interested, I'm going to read the screenplay this evening. So it's about a poor outcast boy, an orphaned, who becomes a novice at the time of the Buddha. So this TV series allows us to see the Buddha and the great disciples and things are happening through the eyes of an ordinary person, someone who's not Geng, and he's like a representative of ordinary people this day and age. And this plan is for 9 episodes, and he's a monk, a novice, a young monk, and then he leaves the monkhood and gets married, has a family, and then tragedy occurs. His family pass away in an accident, and he becomes a monk again and follows the Buddha to Kusinara and is present for the funeral of the Buddha. So it's like his life story, in which be able to meet many of the great figures from time of the Buddha. So we right now are in conversations with people at the top level in entertainment industry in Thailand, people who work with Hollywood and other really the top people, trying to get this kind of dream team to make this project for not for profit, but for promote Buddhist values and illuminate Buddhist values in Thai society. So my idea is that it's non for profit, but then presuming it's sold internationally to Netflix or whoever, then we're going to establish a fund, a young Buddhist filmmakers fund, so that young people, new generation in Thailand who want to create Buddhist content or want to do series or movies can look to this fund for seed funding. So that's the dream. And if anybody interested, I'll read you some of it later on tonight. But Satu, I haven't watched. I'm not a great movie. In a romantic relationship, if one feels that the other person likes them more, or vice versa, causing discomfort, how should one proceed? Well, I think that's kind of the norm, I would say. I mean, it's more likely to be that than two people have exactly the same level of attachment and love and interest in the other person. And it's just things that couples have to navigate. And as you say, to what extent, if a couple feels that it just becomes the disproportionate intensity of emotion becomes too uncomfortable, usually for the person who feels less intense, then couples split up. If both sides just want to stay with it, then you have to have some pretty frank conversations about this, because just as the person the person who has less investment in the relationship feels kind of steamrolled and kind of overwhelmed by the other person's love and intensity, then the person with all the emotion kind of feels that always wanting that person to have the same level of intensity that they have, and feeling disappointed and trying to kind of find a way to make that person feel the same way about them that they do about that person. So this is the dukkha of relationship. This is it's the norm. The relationship always have something or other that destroys the paradise after the initial period, which is a bit like being drunk. After that kind of drunk period goes, and then you sort of wake up a bit, and then you sort of see, actually that's a little bit awkward. But you can't, you can't tell people don't love me so much, and you can't tell somebody love me more. So we can sort of balance this out. It's how you, whether or not it's worth navigating, talking through, and talking about expectations of each other, and having that respect for each other. Because someone who has really loves the other person a lot, and they don't respond in the same way, then they have all these kind of doubts. Do they really love me? Because their idea of love is their standard, you see. So they think, well, if they don't love like me, then maybe they don't love at all, you see. And so there are all these kind of doubts and things that cause a lot of unnecessary anxiety and pain in relationships. So it's good to develop this ability to sit down and talk this stuff through, because it's not just going to go away by itself, probably. What is your opinion on same-sex couples marriage? Yeah, I don't really have an opinion. The couples are couples, whatever their sexual orientation. For me, that's kind of irrelevant. It's more the way that couples treat each other. Say keeping the third precept, cheating, being kind, being generous, being patient, being respectful. So using that kind of intimate relationship as as one part of your spiritual journey also, and supporting each other in growing spiritually, as well as being companions in the world. And so, yeah, men, women, men, whatever. I never really kind of thought very important. So, เรามีวิธีเผชิญหน้าเนี่ยภาษาไทยเอาไว้ก่อนโอเคภาษาไทยเอาไว้ตอนบ่ายเนาะOkay, good questions today. What is morally correct? Deciding to let your parent get run over by a train instead of 50 people, or the other way round? I think I get your point, but it's not so clear. I have an objection to these moral dilemma questions. I just don't think they're very helpful. And so the story I usually tell with regard to these kinds of question regards occasion in England in 1978 when I was living with Lumpur Sumedho. And at that time, the monks from Ubon were living in central London, in Haverstock Hill, which is just between, for those of you from London, between Chalk Hill and Hampstead Heath. And it was right on the road, and so you'd get people coming in all the time. When they knew monks were there, they want to meet them and talk to them, and often very respectful, and sometimes you just get really weird people come in, or very aggressive people coming in. So there was this one man came in, and he kind of confronted Ajahn Sumedho, and he said, "Okay, you're a pacifist, right? You don't harm other beings, and yeah, okay. So what if some maniac had a knife and he was going to kill your mother? So this is like classic moral dilemma. Okay, you're a pacifist, but what if someone's going to kill your mum? Or do you save your mum from the train, or 50 people from the train, or whatever it is?" And so this was a question which Ajahn Sumedho did not ask as a category 1 question, as I described yesterday. But he said, I am confident that if I'm mindful, I will make the best possible choice in that situation. See, for me, this is a really wise way of answering this question, because a moral dilemma is not a real life situation. You're just taking out 1 or 2 elements of it and creating something. Whereas we live in real life situations. And the Buddhist principle is always, how do you, not you should make this, there's this, this is right, this is wrong, you should do this, and you shouldn't do that. But Buddhism is saying things are complex. There are so many causes and conditions coming into play. Put yourself in the position where you can make the best possible decision. So we don't get drawn into this kind of whole realm of moral dilemmas. It's not real life. The question is, if you are in a terrible situation, emotional situation, in which the lives of those you love were threatened, how would you make the best possible decision? And Ajahn Jayasaro is saying, from his experience, the more mindful he is, the better decisions he makes. So that would be how I would answer that question as well. So I've been abroad for roughly 10 years. I'm coming up to a juncture in my life where I have to decide whether I should do what's best for my career, stay abroad, or come home. How should I make this decision, weighing in the responsibility I have to my aging parents? Again, there are just so many different variables there which I have no knowledge of, which would prevent me from making any, giving any sort of specific advice. For instance, the kind of follow-up questions, well, how much of a hit would your career take if you were to come back here? You say it's better for your career abroad. How much better? Would it be like disastrous for your career if you came back to Thailand, or just not quite as good as being overseas? Is your judgment of your career path a trustworthy one? Is it something that knowledgeable people would agree with, or are there in fact probably more possibilities in Thailand than you know about, or are there less? So the whole question of the impact on your career is something that I would have, if I would have a lot of questions about, to say, on what grounds you're making that judgment. And so I would say, if you say, well, the actual impact on your career would not be a major one, then maybe coming back to Thailand would be a good idea, because, of course, being able to spend time with your parents. And every now and again in America and places, they have these kind of surveys, and they ask people at the end of their life, what do you regret? 70, 80-year-old people, you say, what do you regret? And nobody ever says, I regret I didn't make any more money than I did. But people say, I regret I didn't spend enough time with my family. So I think that's interesting reflection also, in terms of, looking at your life as a whole, and what you want to do in your life. And so not your rights, but your responsibilities, and things that you'll really feel good about at the end of your life. Then, taking care of aging parents or supporting them is, I think, a very important factor in that. Having said that, we live in the modern world, where it's very easy to travel, and if parents are not yet old, they're still hale and healthy, maybe like in their 60s, 50s, 60s or something, where they don't need that much care as yet. And you know that if there was something come up, you could catch a plane and be back home within 24 hours. When you have regular contact over phone, FaceTime, Zoom, and so on, then that may well be sufficient. It's more you show that care and interest and just maintaining that regular contact. I think most of you are probably very good at this compared with people in the West generally. So I don't have an answer to this. I'm just sort of some of the things to consider, like the health of your parents, who's looking after your parents right now, if they're still healthy and working, and they don't need that much close care, how much they miss you, how much they'd appreciate you being there, to what extent regular contact over FaceTime and coming back once or twice a year for longer holidays works. So I'm just giving you, things to write these all out and weigh them up. But again, the Buddhist advice is meditate. When you meditate, then after a while, it's not like you're meditating on this and you're just thinking about this, but as your mind becomes calm, things float up to the surface. And you think, yeah, actually, this is what I need to do. It's because we're not really in contact with a lot of things going on in our unconscious and underneath the surface. We're rushing around here and there so often. But when you stop and everything just settles down, it becomes obvious. Well, yeah, of course, I should do this, or this makes much more sense. So finding a way to really get into touch with what's going on inside you is, I think, really important. So I think we're at the end of the English questions. Okay. Just answer this question. Is wisdom a memory? If so, when do we collect it? Is wisdom useless without samadhi? Okay, actually, that's a very big question. Firstly, wisdom is not a memory. Memory, as we use it in English, doesn't correspond exactly to words in Pali psychology. So some elements of memory we call sanya, and some elements of memory we call sati, or mindfulness. So memorizing something is sanya. Recollecting it is mindfulness. So let's say you put your glasses down. As I'm talking to somebody and we're chatting, and I put my glasses down, and then somebody, where are my glasses? And I can't remember. But that doesn't mean my mindfulness is bad or my recollection power is weak. I didn't put any data in my mind to begin with. There's no sanya. So if you have this sanya, it's like, okay, I'm aware I'm putting my glasses down here. Okay, that's sanya side of memory. And then 5-10 minutes later, say, where's my glasses? And I remember because the sanya is in my brain. But if you don't put the information in the brain in the first place, you can't draw it out. So memory is separate in this way. So wisdom means seeing things clearly the way they are. It's not memory. And wisdom can be divided into different levels. So you have a wisdom, like everyday wisdom, based on what you've been told, what you've learned, what you've heard, what you've read. For example, somebody says, don't put your hand in the fire, it will burn you. Okay, you don't have to try that out for yourself. Okay, you have that wisdom. That's not a smart thing to do. Okay, so that's everyday wisdom. Wisdom that's like accurate information about the world, which helps us to live our lives safely and constructively. And then you have a second level of wisdom, which is like intellectual wisdom and understanding that comes through thinking and reflecting about things and drawing conclusions from observations. So like a lot like scientific discoveries, that kind of wisdom where Archimedes sits in the bath and the water level rises and it's like what does he say? Eureka. So it's like observations and taking knowledge from here and knowledge from there and putting it together, and that's second kind of worldly wisdom. But third, and this is what we would call like the true wisdom in Buddhism, is that which comes about through pavana, it's pavanamaya panya. And that's wisdom that's only arises when the mind is in state of samadhi, when the mind's put down all of its defilements temporarily and has a clear, unimpeded, unbiased vision of reality at that moment. So that's the kind of vipassana panya which can remove defilements, lead to liberation. And lastly, if we are like a candle, does our flame ever burn out? Are we a being that reflects, absorbs, or cultivates light? That might be taking the analogy a bit too far. We're saying there is a process, and in the analogy, a candle, different candles are like the physical dimension of this process. So one candle burns out, another candle takes its place. The flame continues, but the physical substratum or physical support changes and varies. So that light, if you want that process, has no discernible beginning. So this is one of the incredible discoveries the Buddha made, and the Buddha's mind is absolutely, unimaginable. I mean, the Buddha's memory covers millions of big bangs. It doesn't just go back to one big bang. It goes back many, many, many big bangs. And the Buddha announced that there's no beginning to all of this. So the idea that you have to have a beginning for things and a creation of things is not really based on any observation. And you say, well, this microphone has a beginning, when it was manufactured in a factory. But that was just taking various raw materials and putting them together in a particular way, which we agree to call microphone. But the raw materials of the microphone pre-existed the microphone. And where did the raw materials come? So we end up going back to the Big Bang. So anything that we see, it's this piece of paper, and if we're materially, we're back in the Big Bang. But then what preceded the Big Bang? So the Big Bang didn't come out of anything, nothing. So that we're always sort of going back. There's no discernible beginning. There are just changes of form until arahantship, enlightenment, and then for the individual, there is the ending of this whole drama, soap opera. Okay, that's the morning session.